at least for me, gratitude, a deep breath, and thank you.
All right. Well, good afternoon, or perhaps good morning, or even good evening for wherever you may be joining us for this extremely special panel plenary we are about to be treated to being part of. I am Lauren Rabinowitz, for those of you that don't know me, and I am actually not going to take even another moment. I am going to turn this session over to Khadijah Johnston, and she is going to lead us through an incredible, incredible session. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you very much in advance to our phenomenal plenary participants. Thank you, Khadijah.
Much gratitude, Lauren, and welcome everyone. We are so heartened and honored that you're joining us to both witness a dialogue about and hopefully participate fully in the experience of considering the consultative stance as a portal, a passageway to transforming our early childhood mental health consultation practice into an instrument for advancing equity. And so we'll begin by telling you a bit about ourselves, Germán Walteros, Don Yazzie, and Eva Schreiber, and then we'll let you know a bit about the terrain that we'll travel on together over the about next hour and a half today. So, Don, would you start us off by orienting us to yourself, your identities, your journey in early childhood mental health consultation?
Thank you, Khadijah. I'm happy to share with everyone. First and foremost, I'll say my clans, Ye'edin Etachit Shnida, Kiani Bashchin, Ado Sanad Lehebe Wetnishle, Ko the Nebekaya Queshas on Ado Queshagan. So I just shared my clans. My mother's clan is roughly translated as giant deity people, Navajo's matrilineal. So I know my clans of my, I don't know, 1000th grandmother. And my dad's clan is Kiani, or roughly translated to towering house. And I also shared that I am the child, I'm the baby of Changing Woman, who is one of our deities, major deities in our Navajo culture. And she's the one that provided everything on us on earth. It is said now that she resides near the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, on the north side of it. She was here in this area and made her journey that way, but she left everything that we have, you know, all the materials for all this technology, computers, you know, fiber optics, everything that we have. And for Navajo, you know, of course, all of the things that we use when we pray in the morning, our pollen, our cornmeal. So I'll just, you know, come to you. That's how I am representing myself here. And also I had the fortunate, you know, privilege of going to school, and I got my degree in clinical counseling, counseling psychology. And early in my career, I did do therapy. And I happened to be placed with a wonderful, wonderful therapist mentor who knew infant mental health. She was the only one in that little city in Flagstaff. And from there, you know, came back to Navajo Nation and tried to bring infant mental health to Navajo Nation. And to this day, still working on it. I did do consultation. I was introduced to it 8 years ago, and I kind of finished up that work locally in the Navajo Nation this past June. But, you know, so much I've learned from becoming consultant, being trained as a consultant. And I saw a lot of similarities between Navajo culture and infant mental health and consultation. So that's, you know, kind of how I come to you all with this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Germán.
Thank you. First of all, honored to be here, especially with Khadijah, Eva, and Dawn. It's just a pleasure to work with all of you. Germán, I'm here in San Francisco Bay Area. I identify as a Latino, but more specifically, I like to think of myself as a Brooklyn boy, right, from New York. But I hail from the Andes of South America, Colombia, and I hold that dearly to me, in myself, my identity. But now I identify as a Latino because I belong to the diaspora of people who came from southern border and all the Americas. I've been a mental health consultant for many, many, many years. So I'll get to talk a little bit more about that later. But it's just great to be here, and hopefully we are, as a collective, be able to enter through that portal and create something new today. Thank you.
Thank you, Germán. Eva.
Greetings, everyone. Yes, I'm also just so thrilled that we're having this conversation. Yeah, just so happy that we're sharing. Actually, we've had these conversations, right, among the four of us, I think, for quite some time, with Khadija kind of in the center, us rotating around you as we've applied the stance to lots of different ways of understanding our work. So yes, I'm Eva. I'm the director and founder of Indigo Cultural Center. We are here on unceded lands of the Tohono O'odham Nation and the Hohokam. And I identify as African American, cisgendered female. And my ancestors, I'm the descendant of enslaved Africans, and my ancestors practiced Black liberation theology kind of at the turn of the 20th century. And what that really means is really understanding education and spirituality, kind of the almost impossible to unwind those two things, but those two, spirituality and education, as a pathway to liberation within and liberation for our people and without. And through our work at Indigo Cultural Center, I definitely am carrying on their vision and their mission and the dreams, quite frankly, the dreams that they didn't live to see, but that live in me and in all of us. I'm a developmental psychologist by training, and specifically, I have a deep love for early care and education and also infant mental health. And so discovering mental health consultation 14 years ago, working with Smart Support here in Arizona, that's the name of our initiative, was just, yes, a big full-bodied yes, 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 yes. And so I entered into the world of mental health consultation wearing the hat of an evaluator and a researcher. And for those of you who have heard me speak before, you know that I see research as a portal. It is a portal for greater understanding for our work. It is a portal for accountability for all of us to know, are we moving the needle in ways that we want to be moving the needle? And, you know, through our research, we discovered some really interesting trends, racialized trends with mental health consultation. And then that started me on my journey personally, and then Indigo on our journey, really understanding the potential of mental health consultation to really be a disruptor of bias, a way for us to understand ourselves in very important ways, a way for us to co-create relationships with our consultees that also lead to greater liberation on multiple levels. Here at Indigo, we attend and attune to the infrastructure of mental health consultation. So we participate, we have a lot of partnerships with evaluation and research, and also a lot of equity consultation and training and facilitation. Those are big activities. And we also are very interested in what are the frontiers of mental health consultation? What are the trends? What are the really interesting and unique things that communities are trying? And what are the ways they're understanding their work? And we seek to amplify those and understand them. And I think I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Eva and all. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Khadija Johnston. Probably patently evident, increasingly weazened white woman. Hopefully less obvious, a bit under the weather, but I tell you that in advance so that if I go into a coughing spasm, you will be aware. Although the energy and love of being with all of you, and especially with my friends who are holding me up in this moment, as you often have. It seems like it's going to be pretty easy to make it through this time together. I am from the 3-generation, 2-kitchened basement of Italian immigrants in Colorado. I now have, for the last 40 some years of my life, lived in the Bay Area, and will be now looking for your ancestors and spirit deities, Dawn, under our bridge. I'm also a clinical social worker and infant mental health practitioner who has spent most of my lifetime, I used to say career, but as someone who increasingly, or maybe always, has known, believed that our work and our ways in life are not separable, nor should they be, that I've spent most of my lifetime, almost 30 years now, learning about, loving, practicing, pitfalling, and then picking myself back up to plow more deeply into the intersecting arenas of early childhood mental health consultation and social justice that we'll be contemplating together today. And along that way, though, in those 40 years, I hope that my own ongoing transformative process has benefited others who are on similar journeys, as I've had the honor, the privilege of providing consultation, communities of practice, technical assistance, supervision, through being the director of a multifaceted mental health program here in the Bay Area. Hopefully, the individual practitioners who have touched me and who I've touched, and the programs and systems have that I've endeavored to think with about mental health consultation have benefited. So now, moving from just beginning to introduce ourselves, although I feel assured you'll get to know a bit more about each of us and all of us collectively. I'll talk about the terrain we're going to travel in the rest of our time together. And I have to say a probable disclaimer, but about which I'm proud. And I know this was billed as a panel. But when I think of panel, I think of this linear kind of experience. And I think what's going to happen is going to more closely resemble a spiral dance. Partly because none of the 4 of us are exceptionally linear in our thinking. And also because the 4 of us find, I hope it's okay to speak for you 3, find incredible joy in partnering, in playing with and off of each other. So the way that we're going to organize, that we've organized this, is that for each of 4 segments, each of us will take the lead, be the lead partner, offering our choreography around some aspect of the consultative stance and its potential when imbued with diverse worldviews and expansively envisioned, then how it can be an instrument of equity. And the ideas, the notions that each of us proffer when launching our segment will serve as provocations for the other 3 of us to respond to. Please join in, post your questions in the Q&A. Join in anywhere along the time together, but what our intent is to have some time at the end of our time together for you to more proximally participate in the dance. So I'll start off with our first segment, and the reason for my privileged position is because of being the transmitter of the consultative stance. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the consultative stance, it's a term coined by my co-author, Charles Brenneman, and I in a text that we wrote on mental health consultation many years ago. And the stance, which we will not go through in any detail today, the stance is comprised of 10 elements. But what I will tell you, for those who are unfamiliar and hope you will become more familiar, is, or remind you if you already know, is that the 10 elements, each one of them describe a characteristic of how a mental health consultant comports themselves, their demeanor in the practice, and talks to us about ways in which interacting with and encouraging understanding of and connection with and between those of whom we consult might benefit. So where did the stance come from? When we were having preparatory conversations among the four of us, part of what my friends said to me was, talk about the lineage of the stance. So I've been thinking about it a lot, and the lineage of the stance, of course, is important to acknowledge. And yet I realized kind of impossible to trace precisely. But what is possible, and I think proper, is to identify and honor contributors to the shape it took. Because I'm really aware, became more aware when asked the question about where it came from, that in crafting the stance, I really was mostly a conduit. Most proximally, I really premised the consultative stance's elements on principles that I learned in my mental health training, and specifically by sitting at the knee of my mentor, Dr. Jeree Paul, who passed to me and through me the core values conveyed in the consultative stance. And I think as an example of her brilliance in distilling and sometimes I think intentionally deconstructing complex clinical concepts to reflect essential human truth, Jeree Paul offered us the maxim, which might be familiar to some of you. She said, how you are is as important as what you do. Inferring, of course, that our willingness and our ability to truly see, connect with, and empathize with others is integral to any of our interventions being successful. Jeree and Charles, my partner Brian, and others helped me to give voice to my long-held beliefs that relationships are transformative, that interdependence is essential, that our realities are our own constructions, enriched by entertaining multiple perspectives, and the belief that connection creates health and affords healing. But what I also want to add is that what was not always in my awareness, what I was not always conscious of, was that through the consultative stance, I was channeling beliefs, values, and practices held for millennium by collective cultures and traditional communities worldwide. I credit and am grateful to my cherished colleagues here, Herman, Eva, and Don, for peeling back blinders built from being steeped in Western white dominant individualistic ideology. With your and others' encouragement and my own commitment to an intentional self-practice and study, a study of embodied anti-racist practices, white privilege paradigms, somatic studies, radical dharma, studying emergent strategies, and other frameworks. I've come to appreciate the expansive potential of the consultative stance, what it could be, what it has been. And perhaps it seems grandiose, but it's probably a time in our world for some big visioning. I believe mental health consultation has the potential to transform individuals and institutions, to address personal harmful biases, as well as to dismantle systems of oppression impacting very young children. Oppression, hatred, disconnection are mental health issues. Combating these offenses are then, I think, the primary purview of those of us who are mental health consultants. And Fortunately, my beliefs, it turns out, are beginning to be backed up by research for those of you who give primacy to science. Studies are confirming that the consultant's demeanor and the relationships that she creates as a result are powerful instruments of change. Colleagues listed here found that the quality of the mental health consultant staff relationship was the single most salient predictor of mental health consultation services being effective. And my friend Eva and her colleagues, through their work with Smart Support in Arizona's mental health consultation program, where Dawn also was a mental health consultant. The work there from their evaluation, I think, really opened all of our eyes to the powerful positive effects that mental health consultation can have. That employing the stance toward developing positive relationships with our consultees can have on changing biased perceptions of Black and brown boys. Indigo's work not only pointed to the consultative relationship as a prognosticator of positive outcome, but it told us something. It illuminated something about what were the mechanisms, what was involved in making that positive change. And what Eva's work found was, and I always feel a little funny, talking about it when she's sitting right here, but here I go again, is found that racial matching between consultant and consultee mattered. And that early childhood mental health consultants who reported that they had consciously cultivated knowledge about historical and current inequities, that they had embraced a posture of cultural humility and doing the inner work of social justice. Those consultants, along with when there were racial matches, were more likely to address and help to amend the injustices through their work. So I believe that the 10 elements of the consultative stance that are listed here, but that we won't go through, allow us to embody a diversity-informed practice and transformational healing of individuals and institutions, of children and adults. Through parallel process, which what it means is do unto others, as Jerry Paul also said, as you hope they will do unto others. Treat others as you hope they will treat the children in their charge. These ideas of giving centrality to relationships, being curious about and appreciating both the proximal and the distal influences, the socio-political, the interpersonal influences on how consultees see the world and therefore connect with children and their coworkers. Practicing patience when transformation feels slow in our work. And perhaps most importantly, holding hope as you peer into the portal of as yet unknown but knowable others. These ways of being are central to our ability to expand our own and our consultees' perceptions, to increase empathy for the other, to respect and love one another and the children in all of our charge. So that's my introduction to the consultative stance and how I came to understand it and continue to come to understand my relationship to it. And I would like to ask, I talked about its history, my relationship. I'd like to ask each of you, what was your first encounter with the consultative stance, and what did it evoke when you first encountered it? And let's start with Dawn.
Thanks, Khadija. So, as you shared, my first encounter with it was when I became trained as a mental health consultant 8 years ago. And I remember it was in Smart Support program in Arizona. Shout out to my former colleagues there, and I miss you all. And I remember Allison and Leah and others who shared about the consultative stance. And I remember thinking about it being very similar to what I was leaning more into in my personal life, which was my culture, Navajo culture. And it just happened to be at a time where in my personal life, I was, doing a lot like repair and healing work with my family, in my culture and learning more about it. And then, this opportunity came up to become a consultant. And I remember thinking this is very similar to a lot of traditional teachings and to what I've learned about traditional practitioners in Navajo culture, ways that they have been in a relationship with me and my family. Not that I would compare, their work to this work, but there is, for me, this element of spirituality. There is this element of bringing the whole self together in becoming a consultant. And it was really about, like, okay, here's that, how you are. Here is that way of being that, I really started to see the edges of. And some of you have seen me do presentations where, I list the consultative stance, and I also translated most of it into Navajo. But when I looked at the translations, it was really about long foundational teachings that go back to origin stories in our Navajo culture. So that's a little bit of what I wanted to share about what it elicited or evoked in me. I learned.
Thank you, Dawn. And I, as you know, distinctly remember the day when supposedly I was the teacher of the consultative stance to the consultants in Arizona, and among them was Dawn, who came up to me after I had given my presentation and said to me quite quietly and humbly, and in Dawn's incredible equanimity, my people have been practicing these ideas, these ways of being for thousands of years. And it stuck with me and continues to stick with me and continues to be the reason that I want to keep following you, Dawn, and learning from you. Thank you. Eva, Herman, either of you, please jump in, Eva.
Yeah. Thanks, Khadija. Thanks, Dawn. So the first time I encountered the stance, it was, I think it might have even been before Smart Support officially launched in 2010. I think in 2009, I was reading your book. And at the time, my research agenda, Indigo had just barely started, but I personally have had a research agenda of really being interested in the helpers in early care and education settings. Who are the helpers? And back then, we didn't have the clear delineation. What is a consultant? What is a coach? What is a mentor? They're all kind of in the soup. And I'm talking mostly about national narratives. I know in specific communities like San Francisco, there were clear delineations at that point. So I had done a study when I was at the University of Pittsburgh. I was really interested in Black helpers, African-American helpers, who were in early care and education settings, both center-based and home-based. And I interviewed them, different domains. And I just remember when I was reading your book, I thought a lot about the themes that came up through those interviews. And so I immediately connected it to culture, understanding that what was so beautiful about the book was that it wasn't kind of a list of what to do. It wasn't a checklist of what to say. It was who you are, the embodiment of it. And it's so aligned with what I was learning at the time from these interviews with these Black, mostly female helpers in classrooms. And then fast forward about 5 years, we had our beautiful data set with Smart Support, and we were analyzing data, and we saw these interesting findings about closing racialized gaps for children who were the focus of consultation, for case consultation. And I was blown away. We saw that, specifically African American boys who were the focus of consultation, they started off lower on almost every single measure. This is teacher report measure of outcomes. And after 6 months of consultation, we saw some of those gaps close. We saw some of those racialized gaps close. And the first thing I did was, Allison, can we have another meeting with the consultants? The way that we do evaluation here at Indigo is we really lean on the people doing the work to help us interpret our findings. And so I brought these findings to the consultants, and I was like, were you all talking about race? And maybe I can see the faces. I can see faces. About a third of them raised their hand, and then the other 2/3 had like big eyes, like, oh, were we supposed to be talking about race? And I shared with them the findings and explained it. And I said, well, help me understand how we saw these gaps closed. And add in their own words as they were listing kind of their, I don't want to say stance, but that it was basically a stance, what they brought and the way that they interacted. We lean in when other people lean out. We're curious, emotional availability, all these things. I looked at it a little bit later and I was like, oh my gosh, these map on almost perfectly with the consultative stance. And then I think Khadija at some point, I might have emailed you or called you and said, just by the way, I've been positioning the stance as a kind of a catalyst of change in helping us understand our findings. Is it okay that I'm doing this? Anyway, and then I think that started you and I having more conversations, and we started co-presenting together and working together more closely on understanding the relationship of the stance in this more kind of racialized nuance. And I think I'll stop there for now, but yeah.
Oh no, I totally remember, Eva, the calls way back, and I can see your face now of ooh, 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 as you say, only so well. But what I didn't know was, I don't think I knew until this moment, the idea that when you first read the stance, that it was reverberations of the work that you had been doing with African American providers in early care and education.
Yeah.
And thank you for continuing to bring me along in this journey. Herman, my longest compatriot in this practice, please, at 40 years ago is when we started developing the stance together. When Herman and I met, there was no such articulated document yet.
Right. I was thinking about your question. When did you first encounter the stance? And I said, oh, I was in the matrix of it.
You were.
But I wasn't quite aware of it, because I think certain universal knowledges inhabit you in a way that you don't realize it at the moment. But I was at the matrix of it in the late 80s, early 90s, when I encountered the practice of the stance, because you had not put it in such a concise way at that point. But in the spirit of the spiral dance that we want to do here today, Don, you mentioned that your elders, that when you encounter the stance, you said, oh, this is very familiar to me. My elders transmitted this to me. I'm paraphrasing you. And that, I think, is the nature of anything that can be expansive and potentially include multiple experiences, that which is universal, right? And that inhabits in all cultures. And what resonated with me when I began to practice this is because I came to mental health from my experience as a community organizer or a community builder, that understood that well-being was the outcome, or was closely related to culturally specific practices, to cultural narratives. Without it, there cannot be well-being. So we needed to take the worldviews into account. And I think the stance allows for that. It's open in that way. It's organically and opened and dynamic, which allows it for it to grow organically, to ferment. I like to use the word fermenting. The 10th stance are a way of fermenting, a way of being in the world. Also, it matched my background in liberation psychology, which now is called decolonizing, and the importance of intersubjectivity as well. In the Nahuatl language, we talk about en la quech, your mother self, is acknowledging this interconnection, intersubjectivity of all living creatures. So it was congruent with my practice, a practice that is liberating in the sense that it allows for continuous co-creation, right, of a narrative that is being repressed. So that is my encounter.
Herman. And it's not just your encounter. It feels like such a natural segue, obviously, to you beginning to talk about whether through fermentation or portal, as metaphor, is you being able to talk about the ways in which the universality of the consultative stance can be a portal.
Yeah.
Will you please take us on the next spiral?
And will you, Khadija, help me with time so I don't take too much, more than necessary?
All right, thank you.
And speaking of universality, makes me think of the Aztec concept of truth. And the Aztecs will speak of truth is the coming together of multiple truths that then creates a single unique truth. But in a very dynamic and dialectical way, that then encounters new truths, right? So one of the things that happened with colonization and the Western thinking colonizing, or attempting, I should say, attempting to colonize the minds and souls of people of the Americas, is the disruption and the fragmentation of narrative, of collective narrative. This is at the roots of oppression and historical trauma. And I think the stance allows for us to be able to address those issues. The stance holds the elements of collective liberation, not individual or dyadic liberation, but a collective. I think we need to open up the lenses to think collectively, not just the dyadic infant, mother, parent, child, dyadic, or the individual, but open it up to collective liberation. Remembrance is holding the collective mind. And again, my emphasis here is over and over is in the collective experience, because I think we need to rescue that. So remembrance is holding the collective mind, extending and validating the experience of the collective, and being redundant for a purpose, right? And recalling that, it's recalling our experiences as a gift to the present. Because without that memory, we cannot continue into the future. It recognizes the collective history, again, redundant, but it's necessary. The collective history of knowledge that something previously known is here now with us. We recognize how the past is here. There's no future, there's no past. It's the here and now in the best sense of it. So we recognize the existence of the past in our souls, here and now. The collective stance then allows, it facilitates, it creates the conditions to reclaim, to restore, to recover, regain narrative that's been taken away from people who have been the subjects and the object of colonization. Here is the central worldview of the cosmology of people, culture. Culture mediates relationships, and somewhere along this, Don and Khadija, you said, it's about relationships, and culture mediates relationship. So we need to remember, recognize, and reclaim. So by doing that, we reclaim a narrative from the margins. We've been subject to this center, which is Western thinking. The advantage of people in the margins, people of color, generally speaking, is that we know both. We are bicultural in that sense, bi-knowledgeable. I need to know what the Western world thinks, but I also need to know, and I live the experience of people in the margins. When I marry those two together, is that we create new knowledge.
I
Central
don't know
equity.
if I'm moving at the speed you want. Come on.
You are absolutely so good at this. It's amazing. You hire. You totally hire. Holding multiple narratives. Let me just stay there. Multiple narratives. The many truths that creates one truth. Yeah, next one, Khadija, please. Because I want to stay within time.
Thank you.
Honoring the subjective experience, right? Or rather, I like to say honoring the intersubjective experience, because I have experience in relationship, right? Honoring all the voices, and the job of the consultant, I think, by using the stance, is to integrate all of this, to bring it together, to ferment it into a new narrative. Next. Okay, stance, rest in place. You went ahead of me a little bit, I think. Can you go back? Okay, I don't know. We have, okay. I had something about the stance is a resting place, a safe harbor, a firm place to stand to reflect on multiple perspectives. You got it there. I was one. So there, resting place, safe harbor, a place to stand to reflect on multiple perspectives. That is the place of fermentation. I think the universality of the stance is because it's open to all of that. Okay.
Thank you so much, Herman.
Sure.
And now we get to play again, and I'm going to invite Dawn to start us. Thinking about what Herman just offered to us, what comes to heart and mind, Dawn?
Yeah, it's in
Then
alignment.
Eva and I'll jump in.
Okay. Yeah, I love being in this space, dancing and playing with you all here. And I see there was a chat relayed to us, and I don't know if I got it right, but this is what I heard from Herman talking just now. But the stance allows a space to remember and reclaim. And I don't know if you said universal knowledge or what we universally know through time, past, present, future, not being there, but being there, but what we know now and what we can bring now. I think for me, that's what resonated, because I mean, in Navajo culture, that's what I've heard, traditional practitioners say is past, present, and future is now. It's not linear, it's now. And now, in our moment of how we show up as a mother, as a therapist, with the work that we do, and this is the COE for IECMHC conference, and the way that we show up as a consultant to hold a space for multiple truths. I just love and want to hold on to that.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. I'll pick up from where you left off also, how we show up as consultants. Herman, everything that you were sharing sounds so beautiful. And I think that what you are invoking is absolutely the potential of the consultative stance as portal. So how do we come into the actualizing this potential? I can't help but think of our workforce. Who's in our workforce? Who's not in our workforce? And all of the structures around just that, those simple questions just right there. When I think about some of the findings we've had around racial and ethnic match between consultant and consultee, that's a very crude marker. It's like a very kind of superficial way of measuring or tapping into something much deeper. And I still, wherever I go, I ask for people, help me understand what is, that's the tip of the iceberg, that little variable match. What is the body of that iceberg? And Herman, as you were talking, it's this worldview and bringing the margins into the center and how we enter. Everything you were saying, I think could be one explanation for what we see when we see ethnic match, and also for those consultants who have kind of self-reported some sort of confidence in utilizing an expansive lens when it comes to culture and race and equity. Who the consultants are, well, that really, really, really matters. But we can't just leave it on the shoulders of the consultants to do this work. We now have to look up the current and understand, well, so, not only who's hired and who's not, and what are the reasons for that. We also need to understand, how are these consultants being supervised to do many of the things, Herman, that you and Don are talking about? And we need to look at organizations and programs where consultants and supervisors are housed. And what are the conditions there that will allow space, time, and just openness to explore consultation in these ways that are so much deeper, than many of us usually allow time for, me included, right? We just kind of go from agenda to agenda. And this is why case, right? Our cases, like how our caseload, this matters. It has implications for so much about not just our approach, but the design, the model of consultation, our caseload, who we're serving, the communities that we're in. It evokes another competency that we don't often talk about with consultation, but increasingly, I know here at Indigo with our partners, we're talking more and more about communities and what are the knowledge, beliefs, experiences, attitudes towards communities. We might even think about developing a competency for consultants around community. And Herman, the way that you talk about the stance, I understand, is also situated in your experience being at Instituto, where most, if not all, the consultants identify as Latine, Latinx, Latino, Latina, Hispanic, right? And so I wonder also about your very special and unique organization that has allowed this way of consultation to really take root and to flourish. I'll stop there for now, but I think for us, it's the potential, and how do we actualize that potential through our other mechanisms that aren't quite as juicy to talk about, but no less important.
Right, exactly, though. Even I was thinking about when you said, that we need to extend beyond the individual consultant, and it calls to mind, right, like continuing to keep a more collectivist view that Herman reminds us of. And I'm thinking also about, like, parallel process extends in all directions. It isn't unidirectional. So the idea of that the stance isn't just embodied by the consultant toward the consultee. Do the organizations, agencies embrace the consultative stance? Is there that kind of room and spaciousness of thinking and time to hold the multiple perspectives of consultants and their work as well? And I was thinking even of the language that we use, like case load. Like, wait a minute, this doesn't really convey, like, it keeps us in, kind of white dominant paradigms around time and urgency and pace and perfectionism that are very, very difficult for individuals, let alone institutions, to break away from. And yet I think if we're going to see some realization of the potential we're talking about, it has to be embraced at all parts of an institution. And also thinking of language, Herman, for the first time, like your very first slide about remembering, recalling, I was just struck, like I hadn't really ever thought about the words that begin with R, including relationship, right? Like, and redundant, which you redundantly reminded us, is this like, it's all about to me, the going back to the past to bring it into the present. The is about an integration and collective coming together. So I'm gonna now know why I love all words that begin with re. Any other, I mean, I know we have many other final thoughts that we've triggered in each other, but we have like 1 minute if anybody wants to say a little bit more before we get more excited and provocations from Dawn. Okay.
It's really just one
Yeah,
little thing
please.
is both I think Don and Eva said how we show up. And we show up with our elders. They sustain us and they move us forward. That's how we show up. One way, by the way, one way of showing up.
Thank you, Herman. Absolutely. We show up with a pantheon. Some of us more connected than others. Some of us more aware than others. But show up with a pantheon of people. And I would add to that, Herman, and then want to recognize, you know, one of the ways that the consultative stance says, you know, acknowledge all influences. Like what's influencing? Why a teacher sees a brown or black boy and the way that she does, and even more importantly than see, the way that that perception translates into treatment of that child and influences their very core sense of themselves. The idea that we don't just come with a group of people, our ancestors, our experiences, but recognizing as mental health consultants that every single person that we interact with has their own pantheon of people, influencing them, speaking to them, whether consciously or not, for good or for ill. And that part of our work is often to be curious about how those often unconscious whispers in the ear are influencing how people think about and take care of children, often in incredibly positive ways. But as mental health consultants, paying attention to where those ghosts exert sway in ways that don't serve our children. Eva, it looked like you were going to say something. Please go ahead. 1 minute. I know 1 minute, but go ahead. Please.
I just want to lift up the angels too.
Thank you.
I think what many are recognizing also is the many harms that have been committed by Western predominant thoughts about mental health, especially on communities of color, communities of culture. I mean, we come with strength, we come with resilience, we come with angels. And there are traditional and ancient and indigenous ways that we have survived and thrived despite these conditions. And so I think also who the consultant is, well, that matters. The consultative stance can be one way to resist the way that we pathologize.
Yes.
You know, teachers and providers and families and communities is one way we can resist. When we truly embody these elements, it is one way we can resist that pathology, that view of pathology. But just want to acknowledge the stance also opens us up to seeing the angels and understanding there are strengths and there's wisdom that is there. You know, and again, just a plug, again, thinking about who the consultant is and their experience with worldviews. I think, you know, looking at racial and ethnic match is a crude marker. And I want to resist the temptation to be reductionist, because not all people of color have this kind of deeper knowledge of self and community. But I think it is more likely that we have a shared language, we have a shared worldview about strengths and challenges when we come into these settings.
Well, and as evidenced right there, thank you to you for bringing the angels to match with my ghosts. Counter them as well. Okay. It's only easy to stop because there's more. So, Dawn, please continue our journey for us.
Absolutely. do my best here. I just like my mind spinning with everything that everyone shared, and
I love it.
thinking about all the parallels. And when we prepare, but see, here we go. Some I try to get a hold of it here. We mute everything, but then something goes off. Thinking about just showing up and being your whole self as a consultant, and being available for your consultee. Thinking about well, what's needed. And I know one of our conversations while we were all preparing for this, and I don't remember how we got to this, but this centering humanity, and I think it was Herman that shared this about the consultative stance helps us to see beyond the physical, the go to your next site, go to here's my progress notes, here's it, when we're in that moment, and then when we leave and when we go back and think about it, and we think about what, I can't put my finger on something, what was that with this consultee that I'm like, what it's pulling or pushing me or nudging me in a certain way, what is it? And thinking about centering humanity and holding a space where you're wholly accepting your consultee's experience, the unconditional acceptance of them being there in front of you, even if it's in a classroom, even if it's a director in their office, even if it's a cook who pulls you aside into the kitchen, and they're cooking, but they wanted to share something with you. Really holding and creating that, I think it's like a sacred space. For me, it feels like it's a spiritual space of where you connect with them. Really about, maybe I want to say like a calm, quiet space where thoughts can be settled a little and not so much racing, and truly bringing your genuine self. And one thing I didn't mention is, when I was introduced to the consultative stance, what also helped me realize and experience it was a very responsive and consistent weekly consultative supervision with my first consultant supervisor, Virginia. She, it helped me to experience it, and I was like, wow, here is this supervisor that holds me and allows me to bring me and my culture and me and all my flaws of how I, might have come with this bias about this center or this teacher or director or a child. But I was allowed to work through it and saw, oh, that's my judgment. Well, I'm glad I didn't say that then. I'm glad I'm saying something now. And it helped me to self-reflect on, what biases I may have come with. Or it helped me reflect on, I've always had an issue in this area with this type of a client in my clinical work. And in my consultant, being a consultant, how I work through it with that support, and how I became comfortable in that space with that consultee and supporting them fully and wholly without judgment. And you can move on to the next slide. And I know from that last point I had in the last slide, but I want it to be here because it more reflects. I was able to take this picture, and I pray. I like to pray. Navajos say you pray in the morning, high noon, and then evening. And this is no filters. It's an iPhone. I took a picture in the morning. One morning I was praying. I think it was like a couple winters ago. And these were the colors that were presented. And so I use this as my Zoom background sometimes. But in thinking about, how I came to be a consultant, how I learned about the consultative stance, and how I shared that, I had to lean in. I was already leaning into my culture, but this just like amplified and, came together with my personal growth and my professional growth. It just synchronously came together, and I guess spiraled is what happened. It spiraled together. And the more I learned about myself, my biases and my work as a consultant, and then the more I thought about my history and my process of healing and repair, with what I know about the traumas, my people, my ancestors have gone through in the Navajo Long Walk. And after that, subsequently all this generational stuff, that had come and followed and landed, I feel like, in each person before me, each woman before me, woman before me, pieces landed in their laps. And I feel like, a piece that I guess I was seen to be able to hold landed in my lap, and then in my daughter's lap as well. So thinking about that repair and thinking about my story and what I needed to fix so that I can be a better helper to others, a better consultant to others. And it helped me to see that, and some of you have heard me say this before, knowing my story and all its pains and challenges helped me to see points and bits of strength and resilience and flipping it to light, to positivity. And that's foundational in Navajo culture. There's always both. I guess maybe like the yin yang, many other cultures. And the part of when I started to see consultees with their challenges and their hard times and hardships, I started to more easily see their strengths. So now I share and say, look in the challenges. That's where you'll find the strengths of consultees. Look in the challenges. And doing that was slowing down.
Oops, sorry. I didn't slow down enough, Dawn.
No, you're fine. That's, yeah. It's kind of like I'm automatically connecting it. So you're fine. Yeah, okay. Go ahead and go to the next one. But that piece of all levels of influence does lead into this part. And I'm glad that we were looking at the slides last week and we saw that some colors switch and it didn't switch here. Thank you, Khadija, for making sure that it was. But yeah, so the east is our white, south turquoise, west is yellow, and north is black. And one thing that I've leaned into in being a consultant in thinking about this as a fan, like our fan, this is our fan model of this little kind of process, circular way that we go through in life. This is a life teaching for Navajos. We call it. It's a part of a bigger teaching, but I'm pulling this little piece out to share this with you all. But I've, in the black is what, we show for Navajo culture. Nahat'ah is our thinking, and in south is our planning. In Sa case is thinking. Nahat'ah is planning, and then in west is Ina, life or implementation, and then north is Sihasin, or reflection. And it's the stages of life as well. But even in a moment with a consultee, you can go through these phases similar to the fan. In a day, or in your 2-hour visit in a center, you can go through these little spirals in these moments. And how do we take care of ourselves and become aware of the dance we're doing in each day, in each moment? So I just wanted to share a little bit of this with you. And is that my last? Okay, yeah. And I shared earlier that I, was able to translate most of it. And these sayings are really have to do with teachings that come from a long time ago, the time immemorial teachings of our origin stories and lessons. But I, wanted to really hold up that Hajanahasli number 10, holding hope. And I shared this yesterday in our plenary of Hajanahasli. We say that 4 times at the end of prayers, and it means that all is repaired and well again, or all is fixed and in balance again.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you. Eva, you want to let us know what you're thinking, what your responses are first?
Much. Thank you, Dawn. Oh, I like the fan. I am less familiar with your sharing of the fan, and I want to spend more time with it. The slide that you had, what opens up, again, brought me to implications for our model. Okay. I know the consultative stance is talking about our approach, our embodied approach, but the model. And I think a lot of, I'm seeing short-term models more and more. And I know this has big implications for funding, and we're bounded by, restrictions around funding, and most states and communities only have a small pool of consultants that have to serve a large area. I get that, yes. And also, staying for 6 months in a site, I don't know how long, what will unfold within 6 months, even a year, what will unfold. I'm struck by some of the research and evaluation that we did with consultants and grantees and the community in San Francisco, where consultation has been around for decades and decades. And one of my favorite findings is we asked consultants, what changes over the arc of your time? We talked with consultants who had been consultants for at least 5 years. I think the mean longevity tenure of a consultant was closer to maybe 12 years. We had consultants talking to us who had been consultants for 20 years. Likewise, we talked to directors, even former directors, who had mental health consultation in their sites for 10, 15, 20 years. What changes over time? And it is clear that a lot of the things we're talking about here, the potential for the consultative stance, really starts to unfold once there is institutional knowledge of what it means to be working with a consultant. So this has implications for so many of the themes that we're talking about in other sessions in this conference. It has implications for preparedness or readiness for consultation. It has implications for, of course, funding. It has implications for evaluation. Most of our evaluations, ours included, almost give the message that almost everything that we need to do can be accomplished within 6 months, maybe 12 months. As evaluators, we are less practiced or experienced with articulating or exploring what happens over the long term when consultants are at sites longer. And I think so much of what you're talking about, Dawn, is time and space and slowing down. It's slowing down. Then of course the parallel process and everything that you're sharing, I can't help but thinking about how are the consultants held and supported to co-construct these ways of being? Who are their supervisors? How are their supervisors locating themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of it. I just keep thinking about the ripple effect of what it is to be a consultant, to be held, to be able to do the type of work that you are articulating so beautifully here.
Hey, Don, what's needed for centering humanity? Thank you for bringing that up. I measure how I'm impacted by something by my breathing changing, and my breathing definitely changed in the last 10 minutes or so listening to you, and I think our task, the 4 of us perhaps, is to speak with you, at least for me, is to understand more about the sacred space. What is it? And because it's the sacred space, if I heard you correctly, it's what holds you. It's what holds your experience. It's unspoken. It's nonverbal. It goes beyond the borderlines of a single body, a single mind. There's this collective experience. That is a sacred space. But I got a feeling that it's much more than that. So it brings together community, identity, all of the above. And I think it was someone said, or Don said something about how do people get trained, enter, and be in a sacred space, right? Is it possible to train, right? Anyways, thank you. Thank you for centering humanity, Don. Thank you.
And this idea, you know, one of the things that you said, and these are my own words, Don, but you said you look to the challenges to also know the strengths, and the idea of the inseparability of challenge and potential, challenge and strength in individuals. And I'm also recognizing it in our conversation right here. Like, one of the things that I'm thinking about is, you know, I realize, and I don't know the term that's best to call it, but you know, that some of the ways that we're talking and some of what we're talking about can feel rather ephemeral, maybe as a word. And yet trying to fit it into practices, institutions, material conditions that are seemingly finite. You know, and I really appreciate, Eva, you're taking a different role. It's interesting. You're talking about systems and practicalities and things, and which I'm very much appreciating. And I'm thinking about, like, that's also our charge, is how do we bring those parts together? Right? How do we bring those parts together? And I would say it's through continual conversation like this, and in our own programs, in our own, like, we talked a lot about self-exploration, and how do we extend that to how do we, within our organizations, our institutions, as mental health consultants, how do we do that? Okay. All right. Are we able to, the slides went away. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I'll try and get them back. Are they back?
Yes, they're back.
Okay. So we'll move, I hope not too abruptly, because there's way more to say. But moving to Eva, if you'll help us take the last leg of our journey for today.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about what consultants and supervisors have said in their own words about the consultative stance and ways in which they've integrated a strong equity stance. Sorry about that. We're having a transition over here at our house. So one of the things that we love to do here at Indigo is we just get really curious about lots and lots of different things. And so the word study, I should probably put in quotations. It's kind of loosely a study, but it's gathering of stories. And so more and more, we're really trying to lean into decolonizing our approach to evaluation with mental health consultation, and really uplifting the wisdom and the knowledge of the people who are closest to the work. And so a lot of what we're doing now is informed primarily by Black and Indigenous and other consultants of color, as well as reflective supervisors, and listening to their experiences, in some cases, very much guided and encouraged to integrate a strong equity lens into the consultative stance and into their work. And in some cases, not necessarily, but they bring it because that's who they are and that's what they bring. So over the years, we had this kind of emergent process. Our data collection, as you see here, spans about 7 years. I think we started this process in 2015 with Smart Support consultants and supervisors here in Arizona. And here's a list of some of the folks and places that are represented in the storytelling. Okay, next slide, please.
Sorry. There you go. Up.
Okay. And the next one. Okay. So some of the research questions, and these were kind of developed after the fact, this emergent process. So using these different lenses that you see here of diversity informed practice, decolonization, anti-racism, how do we understand the evolution of mental health consultation through the tracking of the consultative stance? So this is more kind of a historical descriptive way of understanding. Khadijah, I loved your opening, how you talked about your own emerging process, and even just the stance almost as its own entity, kind of continuing to emerge and evolve, its own thing that is happening, and we're all interacting with it in different ways. And then also how have practitioners, both reflective supervisors and mental health consultants, how have they brought the consultative stance into, to borrow a term that Herman uses, the cultural spaces of childcare that are often embedded in marginalized communities. And is there one more research question?
Yes.
Remember, yes. And then, of course, always, then the question becomes, and how do we deepen our commitment to liberation, to diversity-informed practices and decolonization as we embody, even in new ways, even if for those of us who have been using the stance for a long time, how do we continue to embody the consultative stance? Okay, next slide, please. All right, so here we go. Here are some highlighted findings on how practitioners have integrated racial equity. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of our team members just beautifully coded. We had several focus groups with consultants and supervisors where we had amazing conversations about anti-racism and liberation and the stance. And the top elements that were represented in the themes are listed here: the centrality of relationships, considering all levels of influence, parallel process, and avoiding position of sole expert. Next slide, please. So we're going to have an example of a quote from each one. And I'm gonna read this, and I would encourage you, as you're listening to me reading this, pay attention to your own body, especially for those of you who are practitioners, who are supervisors, who are consultants, and how does this land? And if you were participating in one of our focus groups, how would you talk about the centrality of relationships in regards to anti-racism and social justice and equity? And so this person identifies as white, and they're a reflective supervisor in the Bay Area. And this person, they said, there's certain kinds of values that we have in our agency that are kind of cultural values. And one of them is this concept of in Lakesh, which really means you are my other self, but it just doesn't translate well into English. But I've been thinking a lot about that because we did training for some new consultants on Monday. And we're talking about this concept of in Lakesh and how it speaks to investing in the other. Yes. And it's grounded in the idea that, I will invest in you and recognize the other without othering. And that's a very complex statement, right? I can't even translate what that means. So and I do feel like it's part of the consultative stance, if I boil down to it. It's that I'm investing in you without othering you and seeing you, right? I know, it's very circular. Yeah, centrality of relationships, right? Right?
But so powerfully put, I'm investing in you without othering you. That is complexly enacted. Oh my.
So complex. Yeah. And I'm just feeling like I want to ask Herman to say a couple words about the perforated mirror right now.
Yes,
because
yes.
Just calling out for you to say something about the mirror.
Yeah, okay. The perforated mirror, and I don't want to take your time, but again, if you think of a mirror, if you look at it, you only see yourself. Pardon me, but it's rather Western to do that, right? You see. But if you use the perforated mirror, this is from the Tlamatini, a poem by the Nahuatl people, speaking about Tlamatini being a healer. And the healer uses the perforated mirror. So when I look at the mirror, I see myself and I see you. When you look at the mirror, you see me and you see yourself. So it's mutuality, right? and that it's opposed to this reflective mirror that only leads to me looking at myself.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. And all levels of influence. Yes. And this, Dawn, would you be willing to just share this? These are your words, your voice. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, I was looking at it. I know when I speak sometimes, and it's within context of a relationship and a conversation. And so when I read it, I was like, that doesn't sound right, but I'll try to recreate. Yeah. So I shared at one point, and the more I learned about infant mental health early in my career, a lot of the symbolism that was like what I called at the time. I looked at naval culture and it really fit well. It made sense when you're looking at all levels of influence. And with that, I include culture, spirituality, the sun, moon, stars, locations, places, land, family, multi-generational trauma, and resilience, but also multi-generational spiritual aspects as well. So and I just shared multi-generational healing. And like Erman shared earlier, and Khadija said, we show up with ancestors. We show up with what hurts or repairs that may have happened. And in Navajo culture, we can repair from before and what we do now. So how we show up as a consultant. And that repair now can support future generations.
Yeah, that's the beauty of consultation, is that ripple effect. Yes. Yeah, thank you. And of course, the parallel process, and this was articulated by an African-American reflective supervisor in New York. And they said, I think you're also speaking to the parallel process part, right? Like if our systems and colleague relationships don't hold the importance of ourselves, our stories, our histories, how can we do that with our consultees? Yeah, so some of the themes we've been, I think, mentioning throughout our time together. Let's go to the next one.
Great. And we have a couple more minutes, Eva, if we want to have a few minutes for people to come in at the end. So tell me how you'd like to proceed.
Maybe just this last one here.
Yeah, sure.
And, so this was offered by a mental health consultant here in Arizona who identifies as Latina. And she said, so I would say being very intentional and not assuming that because we are of the same cultural background that we're going to see and do things the same way. I think a lot of times assumptions are made, even by us, that all Latino or Hispanic families are the same. And so a lot of times I have to go back to being very intentional about asking questions like, do you really think that all Latino families are the same? Do you really think that they all discipline the same? We must really be intentional about those questions, because one of the things that I learned was that a lot of times we come again from our lens and our experience, but we don't really think about things like the level of acculturation. So again, I think I see other elements of the stance here as well, but this is a subjective experience. So we can skip the next one. And again, you've heard me say this. I won't belabor the point, but I would say, yes, what are the, Dawn talked about some of the internal conditions and relational conditions, and we must think about the systems, even small s system conditions that are necessary to support this level of equity integration that we're talking about in very, we talk about, as you say, Khadija, in such ephemeral ways. It sounds lovely. It sounds gorgeous. But what are the conditions necessary? I won't read those bullets. You can see those and wonder about those yourselves.
Thank you so much, Eva, Herman, Dawn, and wondering as we ask Lauren to bring forward any, and they need not be questions. They might be more likely what reverberated for you. And unfortunately, we can't permit people to come off of mute. We'd love to hear you in your own voice. And yet thank Lauren for channeling the voices that come through. And as we do, as we wait to see if there are thoughts, responses, reflections.
I did not plant this question, but this seems like a particularly wonderful question that did come in from an attendee, so I will just read this. I wonder, as I consider the last element, holding hope, if it includes the notion of holding and co-creating of a clear and compelling vision of the future. A+ for this individual.
Absolutely. Any responses to how you each think about holding hope? Herman, please.
The future is here. In the sacred space, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
I would
Yeah,
also.
I was thinking about when you said that, Herman, I was thinking about, again, and it's so obviously for those of us who live in Western paradigms, as we all do, some of us have less to kind of recall about other ways of thinking about time and space. But this idea of separation between past, present, and future. And I'm thinking about that in the very practical ways in mental health consultation, when one of the things that I think about when I think about holding hope is that sometimes, we are called in or the funders want to know, and this is no shade to funders, that want to know about, how many children did you help not get expelled, or what was your immediate impact? And this word immediate, right? Like the idea that one of the things for me about holding hope is the idea that by what we do now, who we are with, the ways in which we impact each other, meaning the consultant and the consultee, co-workers, that internal change, as we've all been talking about in ourselves and with others, is not an immediate process. And that while we would all hope to be able to have the best outcomes for children in the moment, what I know and am confident about when I enact the idea of patience, one of the elements of the consultative stance, is that it may be future generations of children in a center, that we see the benefit of the fermentation process that's happening in the moment. Eva, I think I interrupted you as you were about to come in, and we have another minute.
Yeah, I think you said what I was going to say. Yeah, the fermentation.
Because we are each other's other self.
Well, yes, and also, rest is resistance, and what that really means, is creating space to do this work when we are constantly going, when we are grinding, when we are constantly hustling, when our caseloads are unmanageable and we're feeling burnt out for various reasons. It is almost impossible to be in this way, the being of consultation. It is almost impossible.
Yeah, I appreciate your talking about the grind. I've been recently thinking a lot, probably because I'm not feeling so well, about the body. And it was this part about believing that we can leave the bone on bone grind behind. Yeah. To really be able to concentrate on the creative expansiveness that is inherent in connection. Herman.
Yeah, in the last minute, Don is going to read something to close, I think.
Great, thank you, Herman.
I don't mean to cut anything of what everyone is sharing, but yeah, it's almost like as you were talking, Khadija, we slow down to speed up, or we slow down to be better and to hold a better sacred space. Yeah. So this came in from a participant, and I've heard it among many tribal communities, also working in national TA. But I hear this, it says, healing yourself heals your ancestors and future generations, end quote. And they said that this was spoken by Laverne Dementif in Fairbanks, Alaska, who quotes her elder mentor on this. There again, for thousands of years, indigenous peoples, and many other indigenous cultures around the world. many other cultures around the world.
Words elude me, and for me, that's unbelievable. Thank you so much to all three of you, to Lauren and our tech hosts, Samia and Catherine and Nicole, and especially to every one of you who's listening in and those far beyond. Thank you for the ways that you're being and the stance that you continue to take.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so very much. We are going to unfortunately have to end, but for a great reason. We have many more wonderful workshop sessions, a storytelling session coming up this afternoon. So yes, thank you so very much to all our panelists. Thank you to our tech masterminds as well. And we look forward to seeing everyone very soon at your next workshop session. Thank you.